The brain develops most rapidly during the first years of life. Children and the boy who was raised as a dog experience lasting traumatic effects resulting from either physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect. Stress during early childhood development increases a child's risk for PTSD, can cause the formation of unhealthy associations, and malformation of critical brain areas. PTSD is caused by an overactive amygdala or imbalances of certain proteins and chemicals in the brain, such as GRP and Strothman. The symptoms of PTSD include flashbacks, hyperarousal, extreme anxiety, and heightened startle response. Dissociation is also a common symptom of PTSD. It is the body's response to a life-threatening event. During dissociation, blood is taken away from the limbs, and endogenous opioids are released into the bloodstream, producing a calming effect and killing pain. Sandy, a young girl who witnessed the rape and murder of her mother, and also who had her throat slashed twice by the murderer, walked around for many hours during the period in which she was waiting for help to arrive, and during that period she was dissociated. She tried to feed her mother various things like milk, and she also tried to drink the milk herself. During that period of time, she would have died had it not been for the blood that was taken away from her limbs, caused by the dissociated state. Among the Waco children, during the interviews conducted by Dr. Perry, one of the girls, upon being interviewed, she hid under a table for 9 minutes and curled up in the fetal position and would not move, whether or not, even after Dr. Perry left the room, and she was tapped by him many times. Hyperarousal is also another symptom of PTSD. Tina, a young girl who was sexually abused during her childhood, she had a heart rate of 112 beats per minute when she first arrived at Dr. Perry's office for her first session. And a Waco girl who was asleep had a heart rate of 160 beats per minute. The two of them should have had a heart rate below 100 beats per minute, especially the Waco girl who was asleep at the time of her heart rate being recorded. Another effect of childhood trauma is false associations. So Tina, the young girl who was sexually abused, came to associate all males with sexual activity. So during her first session with Dr. Perry, she tried to climb up on his lap and unzip his zipper. And she was unable to see him as a father or guardian figure. She only saw him for the sexual activities that were conducted upon her by her male neighbor. Sandy, who tried to feed her mother milk during the period in which she was waiting for help, and who heard the doorbell rung by the murderer, and who also had her throat slashed by a knife, came to avoid all three, milk, doorbells, and silverware in general, because she came to associate them with the death of her mother and the terrible traumatic event. Stress during early childhood development can also cause malformation of critical brain areas. The brain develops rapidly during the first years of life, so areas that can be affected by traumatic experiences are the prefrontal cortex, corpus callosum, amygdala, temporal lobe, and hippocampus. Overworked areas of the brain areas that are used too much or used way more than others, can become burnt out, so they can't perform actions unrelated to stress responses. People with PTSD also have smaller hippocampuses. The hippocampuses are responsible for memory formation. For a brain area to perform a certain task, like the hippocampus performing any kind of memory retrieval or encoding, it needs to have energy. So those brain areas, they increase their metabolic rate. But people with PTSD patients were unable, because of the smaller hippocampus, they were unable to speed up the metabolic rate of their hippocampus, and therefore it resulted in memory deficits. Also in the neuroendocrine system, unbalanced production of hormones and neurotransmitters such as dopamine, epinephrine, serotonin, and cortisol are a result of trauma during childhood development. Tina had altered receptors due to too much production of stress-related hormones. And the children in the Waco compound, they were neglected for many years of their childhood, and Koresh made many of the decisions for them and their parents, so they couldn't make any decisions for themselves. And that resulted in them not being able to decide what they wanted to eat or where they wanted to sit at lunch. And they also had no sense of self. Michael, a young Davidian child, upon being asked to draw a picture of himself and his family, he really struggled to complete the task because he really had no sense of self because he never had the opportunity to pursue his own desires or interests. Many of the children were not able to perform math, but they were able to read very well because reading the Bible was stress. Children are often viewed as malleable and able to recover quickly from trauma and forget abuse and neglect that occurred during early childhood. Unfortunately, this theory is wrong, and quite the opposite appears to be true. Due to the rapid development of a child's brain during their infancy and toddler years, any kind of maltreatment can leave a serious impact on their emotional and mental development. Children who should be riding bikes and playing with Barbie dolls are often found with severe disorders like PTSD caused by immature parents, guardians, acquaintances, friends. Kids who experience trauma during their early youth are often deprived of a proper childhood and have to deal with the effects of the abuse for the rest of their lives.